the cost of the strike. Now we're talking about the three big automakers, US automakers. We're talking about Stellantis, we're talking about Ford, and we're talking about General Motors. And we're also going to be answering the question of, does the Ford Maverick get affected? Well, yes and no. Most vehicles built in Mexico will not be directly affected, but they're going to be indirectly affected. So you can still order up a Ford Maverick. So that's why that picture is up there. We're going to be talking about how you can still order a Ford Maverick. I'm going to prove it with some numbers. If you want the full video, we just put that out this past Saturday. So the last video, if you go to our channel, video list, hit the little video button, you'll have in chronological order our videos. Well, catch the last video talking about, if you can still get a Ford Maverick. Well, the answer is yes, and that's why we're going to be talking about that. Now, I also have the Ford Bronco here because, well, it's a popular model and it's made in the US. It's made in Michigan, and it will be very much impacted by a strike. That means values on these could go back up. So I'd get one of those now. I truly believe the strike's going to be happening. We're going to be talking about numbers, all the details behind the strike, so you're informed. And your Chevrolet and GM products, well, guess what? If they're built in the US, they're going to be heavily impacted. Potentially, dealer inventory could go back down to near zero if the strike lasts as long as the money can handle it lasting. Because for the manufacturers to win, they've got to they've got to get the strike to last long enough that there's no strike money left. So that means 11 weeks or more of a strike in order to get the UAW to, well, you could say fold. So that's going to be big. And Winston, of course, is licking me tonight. And we'll be talking about, GM, Chevrolet. So any of your Stellantis, Chevrolet, GM models that are made in the United States, they are going to be directly and heavily impacted by this strike. Inventories will go very, very low. And prices will naturally, there's going to be dealers asking over MSRP. So I'd say now is the right time to be shopping one of these models. Now, the Ford Maverick is going to be indirectly impacted because some of the parts and some of the supplies to produce these come from the US. So it's not the impact, it won't completely stop production of the Ford Maverick as it will for the Ford Bronco, many Chevrolet and GM trucks, certain certain Stellantis products, the ones that are still made in Canada or the US, are going to be affected. So this does affect 150,000 workers. So that's what's at stake right now. It's the livelihoods of 150,000 workers. They've gone ahead and they've made videos that they've released saying that these days you can't live well enough on the wages unless you work 6 days a week or 5 days a week, but 12 hours a day. So let's actually check over to some of the workers' demands so we understand fully the issue here. So we've got a little Marie's in charge of the laptop tonight, but I'm a bit of a...
I need some help sometimes because I don't know which one you want.
Yeah, so we've got the UAW contract negotiations. This is what they're asking for. They're asking for double-digit pay increase. Now, of course, that can be hard to get on board and understand until we really put inflation into perspective. Inflation these days, the last couple of years, has been playing around 7% inflation. So if we go back to the 1990s, since 1990 to today, you have to make 2.3 times more than that salary in 1990 to be equivalent. And salaries in general have followed inflation, but housing has gone way above inflation. Roughly 30 times. It depends by region. Some regions it's by 25 times above inflation, other regions. But the
but
inflation,
it's still crazy everywhere.
Yeah, the price of housing has gone up by roughly 30 to 35 times more. And that's actually going back to the 1960s. Sorry, from the 1990s, it's gone up many times more than that 2.3 inflation factor. Rent has gone up much more. And as we all know, we all feel it when we go to buy food. Food has gone up more. So they're asking for a double-digit pay increase because, well, they want to pay food, rent, and mortgages. Many of us still would like to live the American dream of owning our own home. For many people, that's their only source of really planning ahead for the future. It's their nest egg. It's their retirement. Selling their home is going to be what's going to fund their retirement. And that's becoming very much less and less accessible. So they also want to eliminate the two-tier wage system. It's become very common in the last 15 to 20 years to have, unionized employees, but then you can also have some non-unionized employees because they're only part-time and you're only hiring them for a short period of time, but that you give them little 1 or 2 year contracts, but you keep renewing their 1 or 2 year contract and they never quite get enough hours to fall into the union. Well, that's another way that, that's not fun. If you're in that situation, you are kept poor, you're kept out of home ownership, so your money's going into rent, meaning your rent is going off to some corporation and you're not building any generational wealth. You're not building any wealth to pass on to the next generation, and you're certainly not building towards your retirement. So it looks like they want to get rid of a two-tier wage system. I think I can understand almost any labor union should want to get rid of this having non-unionized workers because you put them under a 1 or 2 year contract, and those people often are in disadvantageous situations for just general work conditions, safety conditions. They've got less protecting them. And I'm not pro-union or anti-union. I just like looking at things both perspectives, both sides of the coin. So they want better benefits, and they also are asking for a 32-hour work week. Very popular in Europe, asking for a 32-hour work week. Psychological studies seem to prove and show that people are more effective and get more done if they've got 32 hours to do it than 40. And I don't know why that is, other than the fact that maybe if you've got 32 hours, you figure, oh boy, I better, I've got good conditions, I better get the work that I need to get done. And when you work 40 hours, well, sometimes you're probably a little more tired and you waste a little more time because of brain fog. But anyways, that's just a personal side note. Now, if you want to just change up the slide, let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers is really where the proof in how likely this is to happen and for how long it's going to last. So Deutsche Bank estimates that a strike would actually cost each affected automaker roughly 400 million to 500 million per week of production. And it's close to $1 billion per company. Stellantis, Ford, GM, almost $1 billion per company for every 10 days they're on strike. So they've got profit here that is at risk. Now, you could say that these are significant costs and that these manufacturers want to do absolutely everything to avoid a strike, but then the demands are also going to be costing them a lot of money, and inventories at dealerships are actually very high. Stellantis has incredibly high. They're right under the 110-day mark. So Stellantis has a lot of dealer inventory, and GM has quite a bit of dealer inventory. Ford has a good amount of dealer inventory. That's sort of like a cushion. Vehicles are going to continue to be sold. It's going to continue working towards their overall number of vehicles sold per year. They've probably seen in the last 2 years that having lower inventory means that you can have less rebates, increased MSRP. Now, I think a lot of us are pretty strapped where the prices of vehicles have really started to push some people out of the market. I think a lot of that is actually forced and intentional through carbon taxes when it comes to non-electric vehicles, petrol-powered vehicles, but that's a topic outside of this UAW strike talk. But the UAW, important to note, they actually have enough money in the bank to stop work for 11 weeks because they need to pay each of their roughly 150,000 employees $500 per week. Back in 2019, they increased it from $275. It's now $500 a week. So while you're on strike as a UAW worker, you get $500 a week fighting to try to get more for the future. And the fund, they've got 11 weeks worth. So the UAW can put everyone on strike and pay everyone for 11 weeks. Now, the new contract demands made by the United Auto Workers Union, well, it would add more than $80 billion to each of the biggest US automakers' labor costs, and that means labor going up to roughly $150 an hour on average, according to Bloomberg. So that is the overall cost of what's being asked when you increase the salaries of 150,000 workers. Now, the UAW president, Fain, Mr. Fain, the president of the UAW, is calling the demands sort of the counter offer from the manufacturers an insult. He actually refused to open negotiations by shaking hands, which that's just a traditional start to negotiation discussions. Refused to shake hands. And also, he took Stellantis's offer, the contract offer, and threw it in the trash. So things are starting off, I'd say some of that you could say, some people are going to say, well, that's just show. It's just part of trying to get a better offer. I really think that with this much money at play for manufacturers, they're going to need to go towards a strike. They're not going to want to be able to want to dish out $80 billion each in salaries. But then at the same time, the UAW has strike money. They got to spend that. They've got 11 weeks built up, and now is the time that they're negotiating, and they've got the strongest foothold that they're ever going to get. Because the best argument you can have going into union negotiations is when your company has been making billions of dollars of profit, but also record-setting profits. So the big three have been making record history-making numbers. These numbers are huge. They've never had numbers in regards to profitability like they have right now. So you don't want to be in negotiating, if you're the union president, you don't want to be in a situation where the company is having trouble is just barely surviving and is, near bankruptcy. That's not the time where you go in fighting really hard, asking for a lot more money. You have to do it when the times are good. So if the UAW is ever going to strike and ever have a chance of getting their demands met, it's right now. They're in the best position they'll ever be. Best position in the last 100 years, best position they'll be for the next 100 years, because really what happened in the last 3 years is part of this record-setting profit by all three. It's not that one is on, it's not as if one of the companies is near bankruptcy. They all had record profit years. So they've got the money, and they've got the argument of, hey, parent company, not parent company, hey, employer, you're making more money than you ever have. You can afford to pay us more. So now it's only fair that we ask that you share that profit, because our workers are having trouble making ends meet in this high inflation environment where, if you ask for just 7% of a wage increase, you're not actually asking for the same salary that you had a year ago by getting 7%, because housing, rent, and food cost so much more. They're going up by much higher numbers than inflation. And if we compare back to the 1960s, in the 1960s, inflation from 1960 to now has gone up by a factor of tenfold. It's gone up 10 times. But housing has gone up by roughly 30 to 35 times. Rent has gone up by 20 times. Food, off the top of my head, I don't have the exact number, but it's gone up by a multitude that's much higher than 10. So this is why these workers are asking for this. Now, whether you're for or against unions, you can share that in the comments, but I don't think that's, for us and what we're covering tonight, that's not really the emphasis and what's the main theme. The main theme is, what is it going to do to these vehicles? So we're getting to that in just a minute.
And that's sad, because dealership just started to have inventory, and now we will probably go back to what it was before. So
It's going to go down. So new prices could absolutely go up.
And for sure, it will make a good pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll put pressure on. It'll put pressure on the new vehicles, pushing prices up. Now, used vehicles, there's actually a good amount of inventory of used vehicles. They've been getting bought at auction for lower prices, but a lot of dealerships have not adjusted their prices and still have very high prices. Smart dealerships that want to roll the inventory quickly and prefer to make less money per vehicle, but a lot more volume, well, they've already adjusted their prices a fair amount. So I think in regards to right now, within the likelihood that inventory is going to go down, I'd say there's your big reason to, buy now. You've got 40 days. 40 days is the number of days that the UAW can go on strike because they've got the money for that. So a 40-day strike, if we calculate out 11 weeks in days, that's more than 40 days. The last time there was a 40-day strike was actually in 2019. It was the strike against GM, and that, that was negotiations back to 2019 when there weren't record profits being set by GM. And that led to a production loss of 300,000 vehicles. And it cost the automaker $3.6 billion in earnings. So we'll have to see what happens there. But in 2019, it's important to note that while GM was on strike, 6,000 workers in Mexico were laid off. So yes, this could definitely affect the Ford Maverick production, which could affect and will affect the numbers that I gave out. I kind of in the last video, you'll want to catch it. I gave out all the numbers into why you can still get a Maverick. Well, that's going to depend. That all gets skewed if there is a strike that lasts 11 weeks. So 11 weeks, what are we talking about? 3 months? Just about 3 months?
Around that, yeah.
I wouldn't expect it to last 3 months because I'd expect one side or another to give in before then. But the idea that the strike will last only a week, which is pretty common across the YouTube world, and even big news corporations, big media, I highly doubt that this will last just 1 week. In 2019, GM went on strike for 40 days. And the manufacturer, GM, was willing to lose $3.6 billion. Now, with record profits being made and with Ford losing all sorts of money on electric vehicles anyways, Ford already put it in their books to lose, roughly, it's going to end up costing them roughly $5 billion, $4 or $5 billion this year by selling electric vehicles. Well, if they're making less electric vehicles, it's no sweat off their back. If they're making 0 electric vehicles for 2 months, that doesn't hurt them at all. That's actually profitable because they lose money every time they sell one of these. Now, of course, the losing money is because they're, in advance, heavily subtracting from profits of electric vehicles the cost of modifying the factories, adding on to the factories, changing around machinery, the expansions, the complete new factory, the Blue Oval City. So that's all going into that, loss per vehicle calculation. And Ford's calculating that they lose $32,000 per electric vehicle sold. But they're making a lot of money when it comes to the petrol vehicles, and that's true for Ford, Stellantis, and GM. So the manufacturers are also in a good position to be on strike and get what they feel is fair. And the UAW is in an excellent position to be on strike. So the manufacturers have a lot of inventory sitting around, and too much inventory hurts profits. And that's why GM several times this year has actually stopped truck production for short periods of time because they want to keep inventory low. And at Toyota will not be affected by this strike, but let's use Toyota as an example. Toyota seems to be very happy with having low production because when their dealers have next to no vehicles in inventory, it creates this feeling of scarcity, rarity and quality, like everyone wants a Toyota product. There's none on the lots.
Yeah,
Oh
when
my
you
goodness.
can have it,
There's
you want
one
it
available.
more.
Oh boy, I better jump on it. Everyone wants this Toyota. So it
That's
creates this
crazy how
craze.
psychology work.
It's crazy psychology, but the manufacturers have some smart people working for them, and that they know this sells. Low inventory sells vehicles. Low inventory makes for high profits. So as much as they're going to lose money, the calculated, and we have a slide for that, for how much they're going to lose.
That one?
Yes, it is. So here we've got this from Forbes. Love Forbes. And look at that right there. Those are the numbers. Ford is slated for 10 days of strike to lose 931 million, GM to lose 916 million, and Stellantis to lose 739 million.
That's a lot.
Yep. And then the dealer and consumer impacts, because this is going to affect the economy. Ford, $559 million loss per 10 days. That's the impact to, the dealer and consumer impact. So the cost to dealerships, but also to side businesses that make parts that are going to be impacted because, some companies will make parts for one of these major manufacturers. And, sometimes only 10% of their production goes towards one of these automakers, and sometimes it's 70% or 80% of their production. So that's Forbes is saying that further consumer and dealer losses amounting to approximately 2.1 billion for the big three for a 10-day strike against a single manufacturer. So if this lasts 1 month, let's say, I'd say it probably lasts between 4 to 8 weeks. Well, you're looking at billions of dollars lost to the economy. But the thing is that the manufacturers, when we look at the manufacturer losses, Ford losing 931 million, GM 916, Stellantis 739 million for every 10-day period. That doesn't incorporate and it doesn't calculate the fact that this low inventory could actually lead to removing the current rebates that are on a lot of these vehicles. It could lead to being able to increase the interest rate on a lot of these vehicles. So I don't think the manufacturers are actually going to lose that kind of money. They'll lose it in the first 30 days, but after 30 days, when inventories are much lower, they're going to wipe away rebates. Interest rates will go up, one or the other. For a company, let's say Stellantis is currently offering 15% discount on a Ram or 10% discount on a Ram. Well, maybe the interest rate will stay the same, but a $10,000 rebate will be gone. So it's not going to cost them that kind of money. So that's why I think this strike could actually last 8 weeks. And then at a certain point, the strike only lasting 1 or 2 weeks won't have any positive impact on inventory, and therefore won't allow them to remove rebates because of scarcity or increase interest rates. So I'd say the worst thing that could happen for these manufacturers is a 1 or 2 week strike. It's either no strike or a long strike. And everyone in the media and most of YouTube is saying, oh, this is going to be a 10-day strike. It's going to be a 1 week strike. That's BS. I'm going to BS bust that. That's complete bull crap. I'm going to be a bull on this topic and say this strike is either not happening. I'd say there's maybe a 5% chance that this strike doesn't happen. And I'd say there's a 95% chance that this strike happens. And it'd be very wise for manufacturers, if it does happen, to have it last a long time. Because that's if all three go on strike. If only one, if only GM workers go on strike, or only Stellantis workers go on strike, it's not the same. Then the strike could be very short. But if all three go on strike, well, that's all your truck production, pretty much all your truck sales. So month 1, when inventories are coming down, but after 30 days, there's not much left, but there's still some left, rebates are going to be gone. And remember, people have gotten used to ordering vehicles. So whereas it might hurt them on the books, in the short term, if they produce orders, but orders with 0 rebates and orders with higher interest rates, it's not going to hurt them as bad as what the media it's not going to hurt the manufacturers as bad as the media is calculating this down. You know, Forbes, they're fantastic with numbers, but they're using numbers that are sort of, you could say, direct, not forecast numbers based on, I'm an insider. I know how rebates work. I know how interest rates work. I was never a fan of the employee price unless you're a cash buyer, because every June, you had a better interest rate and less rebate. And then employee price would come out, huge rebate, much higher interest rate. And often it would cost more per month.
But the only thing I wonder, if it lasts long, the strike, yes, we'll lose rebate. People are already, how can I say that? Habitué, what is it in English?
Used to.
Used to, thank you. They are used to order, like you said, but it's not all the manufacturer will be in strike. So what will happen with the competition? If they sold over MSRP, go on orders, and finally, for example, Toyota, Subaru, and Honda, they had inventory. It could hurt.
They're gonna sell more, but when it comes to trucks, which is the big moneymaker for all of these three, they're not going to lose that much business. If you're a Ram truck guy, you're a Ram truck guy. If you're a GM truck guy, you're a GM truck guy. And if you're a Ford truck guy, if there's nothing left, you're just going to order it up. So really, buy right now. Buy before this strike hits. And if I am wrong and there's no strike, well, guess what? Trades, then inventory stays high. Both new and used inventory is high. We've got almost record high inventory on the used side right now. On the new inventory, we're not that far off our record highs of new inventory. We're maybe down 25%. It's not in the trucks. It's, we're overall down on inventory because we don't have enough Ford Mavericks coming in. We don't have enough Ford Escapes. We have no Ford Escapes available right now. Zero inventory on Ford Escapes. Those things come in, and if it's available, it's a customer's order. But if it ends up being canceled and becomes inventory, that thing's sold within 2 days. A Ford Maverick, if it gets canceled by someone who doesn't realize the potential of just reselling it and making money, but if they cancel it, that thing's getting sold within a day or two. If it's sold within an hour when it's MSRP. It's always at MSRP, so it's sold within an hour. Generally, we end up flipping them to become courtesy vehicles and demonstrators so that people can actually test drive the Ford Maverick. Crazy idea, but we did it with the Ford Bronco. All orders at MSRP, Mavericks, all orders at MSRP, and people actually get to test drive them. Thank you so much, M. Peugeot, for the thumbs up. Yes, it would be great if people hit that thumbs up, because it will actually get this information out, and I'm convinced that I'm 95% chances I'm very right about this. It'd be wildly bad for manufacturers to lose 2 weeks or 3 weeks of production. They won't gain anything from it. And if it ends early, when the UAW still has a whole lot of money to spend on a strike, it means they'll have caved. It'll have cost them a lot of money giving in to the demands. Well, if you're going to give in to the demands in 2-3 weeks anyways, or try to get a slightly better negotiation, just avoid the strike altogether. Just get close to what the UAW wants and avoid the strike altogether. This is either no strike or a very long strike, or if it ends up being a 2-week strike, I'll be blown away by the fact that Ford, GM, and Stellantis didn't realize that a 2-week strike is kind of more costly in certain aspects than a much longer strike. Because in a much longer strike, the UAW eventually runs out of money, and they have to give in. They've got 11 weeks worth. On the 12th week, people aren't getting paid. That strike line isn't going to last when people can't afford any food. So it could theoretically last more than 11 weeks, but not by much. And there's also the fact that $500 a week is much less money than these workers are used to getting. So after a while, when the credit cards get maxed out, they're going to start chiming in to go back to work. But right now, they have voted, and as 96 or 97% of the workers voted in favor of a strike. Now, that doesn't mean the strike's happening. All the other reasons that I've mentioned, those are your reasons why the strike is definitely happening. 95% chance. But it means that almost all the workers are in favor of going on strike. And I can understand the cost of living is too high. Getting a 7% raise, some companies top out. 3% raise is like it's written on paper. That's the most that they can give out. That's horrible because you're losing a lot of money. You need at least 7% to match inflation, but that doesn't match the cost of living. As workers, we have a lot to gain back if we want the quality of life that we had back in the 1960s. In the 1960s, only one person had to work in the household, and with one person working a decent job, 2 vehicles could be in the yard, a cottage, a house, and the kids all went off to school, which costs a much higher factor. Inflation since the 1960s gone up 10 times, while education's gone up by a lot more than that. So every aspect of the cost of living has gone up by so much more. So I have to say, I feel for the workers in this situation, and it affects us all. We're all in a bad position because of the cost of living, everything outside of inflation. We can't complain. Our wages have gone up by inflation. That's not the argument to be made. It's not to say, well, we want, to match inflation. We have matched inflation from the 1990s and compared to the 70s and compared to 1960. However, the big one is the cost of living. If you're holding shares right now of any of these companies, is this a sell opportunity? I think right now it's a big sell now opportunity. And day one of the strike, between day 1 and day 5 of the strike, it's maybe max maybe day 30 of the strike, but sometime in the strike when you think these stocks have really bottomed out, it's going to be a buy opportunity, because I think when they actually declare their profits for the year, I think the profits are still going to be half decent. I think people are going to think this is the end for these companies, and the stock market is going to react like these companies could go bankrupt from this strike. And in the end, I don't think it's going to cost them that much if the strike is long enough, because, well, they can pull back those rebates. Ford right now is paying to offer people good interest rates, low interest rates. F-150, low interest rate. That's bought. That's a bought and paid for interest rate. It costs thousands of dollars per vehicle. Thankfully, they're not just dropping the price by $10,000 and keeping the interest rate what it actually would normally be, a non-subvention, a non-rebate interest rate. If they drop the price by 10 grand but have standard interest rate of 8 or 9%, well, then all your trade values die off in value. So, top comment, if you really want to risk it, like we're risking it, I'd say let us know, do you think this is a time to buy now a new vehicle, or is it going to be better to buy after the strike? So I'd love to know what you think.
That's a good question.
Marie, what do you think? You think if you're buying a vehicle, would you wait until after the strike or during the strike, because you think the prices will be better during the strike or after the strike, or right now?
You know what? Because you know me, I love to know that I have something that's in inventory. You want to make sure you have it, because if you need a car right now, you cannot just try to order and hope you will have it soon. So with the strike, it's not the option if you need a car in the next three months, maybe.
Yeah.
So I would go with right now. After that, we don't know what will happen, and it could go in every direction.
I think naturally prices could be rebated come December. So most YouTubers will say December is the best time to buy. End of the year, last week, right before the year switch over. But I think the strike's going to happen. I think inventories will be low. I know every winter trade-in values drop tremendously. So I'd say very much 100% buy right now, buy now, or buy September. Inventory will start going down mid-October. Yeah, if inventory's low to zero, your trade could actually be worth more than it seasonally would be. But your trade already is worth more than it seasonally would be. So I'd say the fact that interest rates on all these models could go up 2 or 3%, that the rebates could completely dry up, I think we're in a position to potentially lose, $10,000 worth of discounted value on the new to maybe gain, a few $1,000s on the trade. And that's a maybe, because the trades could still, there has to be no more new vehicles on lots and people not willing to order their vehicle and then also be willing to buy a used vehicle at 10 to 13% interest rate instead, so that those used vehicle inventories can go down. And used inventory going down is what causes your trade-in value to go up. I think there'd have to be an unbelievably long, an extremely long strike for that to happen. And I don't think anyone thinks the strike's going to last, a year or 6 months. So yeah, definitely buy now. 100% buy now. As I'm being harassed by Winston, I'd say harass a dealer, but a good dealer to buy now. Like Winston's harassing me by trying to kiss my arm. So that's the news. That's the big news. I think this is so important because it is going to affect vehicles. Maverick production won't necessarily stop, but it will definitely slow down. And that could mean that my last episode, I could end up being completely wrong, because all my numbers were based on the idea that Ford would build about 109,000 Mavericks.